Here we go. Welcome back, everyone, for the serverless session track at the Dev Days conference today. I'm really happy to be here again with you. Still mad, working at Devriot as a principal developer advocate. But right now, we're gonna talk about a new topic that we didn't cover previously today. We're gonna have a new guest for this one, which is doing a test automation and also iOS development. You know, two faces of the same person. Please welcome Simon on stage. How are you, Simon?
Thank you, Mats. Good, very good. Feeling good and very energized today, yeah, to actually be here, yeah.
Awesome. So you're gonna talk about something not related about test automation and iOS, but dedicated to versioning and more specifically Git with a brand strategy. So the stage is yours. Enjoy it.
Okay, perfect. Hello and welcome, everyone. I hope you can see now my slides. Otherwise, if there are any hiccups or whatever, just let me know in the chat section. So, as Mats introduced me, I am I'm Simon. I'm a test engineer. Doing some iOS developments as my hobby currently. Looking forward to do that in the future, sometime, somewhere professionally. But today, I would like to talk about Git. So I'm just as a heads up, I'm not contributing to the source code of Git in any way. I'm not working for Git in any way. I'm basically doing talks and workshop related to Git because Git or version control in general is a very, very wide topic. Uh, which you can use everywhere in your life, almost everywhere. So who would ever, who would ever, for God's sake, talk about branching strategies? Isn't that super boring? You know, because we all know, or you all know, how what version control is, how you are using it in your project. But nevertheless, let's see, and you still might learn something from this session. You know, even if it's just a little tiny piece, which you can then take back into your projects and maybe to yeah, to change some things for the good or whatever you want to do with that new knowledge. So yeah, I'm going to talk about Git. That's my main focus. But there are different topics we could talk about here. But I'm mainly talking about branching strategies. But first, let me ask you a question. Have you ever been afraid in your life? Just think about for a few seconds. So I'm sure that you find that you or that you found something, you know, which you were afraid or still afraid in your whole life of something in particular. So for example, me, I when I was a kid, I was afraid and scared of anything related to communication, you know. Whenever that was, even if that was on, even if that was on the phone, holding a presentation, reading out loud, you know, that was really scary for me. And that because I suffered as a kid from something called stuttering, you know. And it took me quite a long time to my mid 20s or something like that when I, yeah, to overcome that handicap, so to speak, a handicap, and overcome my fear of speaking in public. Yeah. And the last time when I was really afraid was when I had to start using version control in a project. You know, that was a really, yeah, couple of years back, very long time back when I joined a project where they used version control, in particular Git, of course, at that point. And I was so scared that I could mess up something, you know, in the repository, in the project, you know, and that everyone would point at me. So I really didn't like to use version control at the beginning. I even asked my teammates or the developers then back then in the project if they actually could do some magic tricks, some magic CLI tricks or whatever on my machine, and that was really embarrassing, and I was thinking, what can I do, what can I do to overcome this fear, and the best thing is just yeah, it's actually easy said. Just face it. Yeah, I just faced that pain, or that fear. Yeah, I just learned it, over the years. I learned how to use it in my different context, because there is no golden way how you should version control or use version control in your project. It is really like you have to always adapt, and that's one thing I learned the most, and I'm really happy these days. Or like 2 years back, I really started doing Git workshops and talk about that, or of my latest fear, so called. And yeah, I think I got pretty good at it over the last couple of years. So that's the thing I would like to talk about today with you, version control with Git. Good. So let's see. Let's start at the beginning with a very simple question. Why do we actually use version control? Does that make even sense? Of course, I don't have to explain you the really basics. Just imagine what a mess that would be if we would, as a team, collaborate on a coding project and we wouldn't use version control. Oh my God, that would be so tedious. So I think I don't have to explain that any further. So version control in your or in software projects in general is probably, besides the requirements and the architecture and so on, probably one of the first things you want to have in place, up and running, especially when we were talking about continuous integration and delivery. There is, of course, no way around version control these days. So that's that's more or less clear. Okay. Um, a brief history for those who are not that familiar from where Git came from. So, of course, Git was initiated by Linus Torvalds in 2005, and back in history, 1991, the Linux kernel maintenance was mainly done with actually by sending patches and archived files from A to B, and that was very cumbersome to do that, and so they started in 2002 using BitKeeper. BitKeeper was at that point in time a commercial product, and but over the next, or from 2002 and 2000 till 2005, the relationship between that company, or the relationship behind BitKeeper, or the relationship behind the company which actually developed BitKeeper and the Git and the Linux community broke down, and then in 2005, Linus Torvalds actually started with the development of Git. Yeah, that's how Git arose out of more or less pain they had at that time back, And BitKeeper, they actually after 2002, they were still up and running, and I think it was 3 years ago where they just stopped the project, this version control system, and so the last stable release was released 3 years ago, something like this. That's just a brief history how Git arose. So what are the advantages of, in general, not particular to Git, of course, just in particular on when we use version control? So the first point I already touched upon that is collaboration, of course, when we want to collaborate in team. Is it like in an on-site team? Is it on a remote team with different time zones, where everyone wants to contribute to code in different time zones? Just think about open source projects and so on. Collaboration, that's the key. Version control, we absolutely need that. And then, of course, pipelines. As soon as I want to build up a pipeline, which checks out our source code, yeah, then version control is a must in these days for CI/CD, of course. Then traceability of features and fixes, of course, just to track who actually implemented which feature at which time, and that feature led to this bug, and so on. So all this traceability from features to fixes and so on. That's massively important. And then the next thing, one straight from my heart, is testing, of course, because testing it makes testing so much easier in the sense of that I can create a branch, and then test a certain state in development or a certain version of my software. So that's an apps. It's super cool actually. Yeah. Then history tracking in the sense of when you are working in a high regulated environment. I was once working in a high regulated environment in the finance industry where they had to prove everything at any time. So they had to actually prove every single commit they did, or even almost every single line. A coding line, also the test automation project where I was running at that time, had to prove its validity, and so that was an absolutely must, history tracking or having version control in place in that specific project. And then, of course, it is a nice documentation of your whole learning journey at the end. You as a team, you develop yourself over time. You learn each day, every hour, you learn new stuff. You change your code, you commit that new change, that leads to a bug, and so on and so forth, just that you can document your learning, kind of a living documentation. That's it. Yeah, it's a version control system, the perfect way to do it. Good. What is Git in particular, actually? So Git is nothing else than just a content addressable file system. So it is file based, huh? But what does that actually mean? So Git is kind of a dictionary. It's just a simple key value store. You put something in, you throw something in, and Git will give you a key back. That's basically it. And this key is, of course, as we all know already, is unique. And it doesn't matter if you have a million commits or whatever in your repository. There are, yeah, of course, not 100%, but there are no clashes or collisions, even so that actually I once read in an article about Git that the likelihood that your team will be eaten by wolves is actually higher than the probability or the fact that two commits in your Git repository will ever have the same commit hash. Exactly. That was a funny story there. Yeah. Good. So what happens actually? Not everyone is aware of that. What happens when I put something in Git? When we create a commit in Git, then Git will create three, not just one object. It will create three objects. That's the file object. That's the file which we want to store, mostly the text file, which we want to store in the repository. And this object is then compressed and hashed. And then there is a snapshot object, also called tree object, and the commit object, and the commit object, that's probably the most famous object because everyone is talking about commit here, commit there, and commit hash here and commit hash there. But there are not a few, or only a few people are aware of what actually happens underneath, what underneath on the file system. What Git is actually doing, beneath or behind the curtain. Of course, now you can say this is not that important. I actually never had to deal with these kind of stuff, but just wait when it really gets complex. And then it might be an advantage when you just once heard about how Git actually creates its object and the relationships to each other. when it gets really complex in your version control project. And one thing is also kind of interesting, Git is um, will actually diff your file. So as long as Git can only read text-based files or show you the differences. So as soon as you throw a binary file, for example, a picture or an executable or whatever, which is not difficult by Git, so which is not difficult by Git into its repository, then Git won't be able to show you the differences, And then Git will do it just by looking at the timestamp, actually, and the size of the file if you throw in a JPEG or whatever. So that's also one important thing. So as long as the file which you put into Git is diffable, then Git will show you, of course, the differences. So what has changed, when, and so on. Exactly. So what are the relationships among these three objects? So as I told you, we have these three objects here, which are created once you create a commit in Git. So at the bottom, we have, for example, 3 files put into Git, and then they are compressed and hashed with a SHA-1 hash here. And then we have the snapshot object, which actually points, which is a pointer to the files underneath. And then above the snapshot object, we have the commit object also with a hash value. Exactly. That's the relationship. So the commit object points to the snapshot object, and the snapshot object is pointing then to the file which we want to store in Git. Exactly. And all 3 objects are actually identifiable by a so-called SHA-1 hash. That's a 40 hexadecimal character value. Exactly. So from 1 to 9 and 8 to F. Exactly. And now if you dig a little bit into deeper to the SHA-1 hash algorithm, then one could say, but SHA-1 is actually pretty old and actually got hacked, long time ago. Why does Git still use SHA-1 hash? That's a very complex topic. So I think since a couple of years, or since 2 or 3 years, there are some endeavors going on to change to SHA-2 hash, which is much more secure than SHA-1. But that's another stop. That's another topic or another story, But it's just interesting to know how everything relates to each other. And the SHA-1 hash, of course, is one very important thing of Git. Good. Now that we all have had a little bit of refresher what Git actually is and how Git is actually working underneath, comes the next question: what is a branch in Git? What is a branch? It's a very simple question. What is a branch? So a branch in Git is nothing else than just a series of commits, actually. So we have here 3 commits. And to actually identify this series of commits, we have here in a little bit dark green the main pointer. That's a branch pointer, With that, we can say, so as soon as we create a branch in Git, Git will create a branch pointer, and the branch pointer is pointing to the latest commit on that particular branch. And in addition to the main branch, we also add to the main pointer to actually the identifier of the branch, we have also the head pointer. The head pointer tells Git which of the branches is currently the checked out or the active branch in your local repository. Exactly. That's also, good to know. So it's a combination. So a branch in Git is nothing than a series of commits with a branch pointer and a head pointer. That's how Git actually identifies what a branch is. Good, but how, why do we need a branching strategy? Why the heck do we actually need a branching strategy? Can we not just create a commit and then work and then everything is good and the world is happy, Well, it's not that easy because, like any other strategy, like testing strategy or an architectural strategy or whatever, you have to have an idea soon, at least as soon as you want to collaborate. Here comes the collaboration thinking again. So as soon as you want to working with others together, you have to have an idea how you want to work with branches. Do we want to have one branch? Do we want to have several branches or just two, or how to, and then what happens, which branch goes to production, or which state of our software, and how do we do bug fixes, bug fixes, yeah, and so on, so there are current, or today there are three, at least I have heard of three main branching strategies or branching model these days. So how can you work with branches in Git as a team in a repository together? And I would like to tell you a little bit about my experiences, how the pros or when they can be useful, what I have experienced in the past. So the first branching strategy is the so-called Git flow, which is probably the most well-known branching strategy, which goes back in 2010 and was kind of introduced back then from a guy called Vincent Treason. He actually has a very interesting blog post about that. I can paste that into, let's see if I can paste that link into the chat and if you can see that. Yeah, that's the blog post he wrote 10 years after he actually created this branching strategy, kind of a reflection on what he did then and if it's still valid or not, And the Git flow branching model actually says you have a master branch here in blue with the blue points. The master branch goes onto production. That's our the production state of our software. Then we have in green a development branch. That's the actually stuff we are working on. That's on my machine, kind of. That's the development state of our software where we do bug fixes, new features, and so on. And then besides these two branches, we have a couple, or might have, a couple of helping branches. So for example, we could have a hotfix branch when we have a problem in production. We could create a commit on a hotfix branch and merge that into master. We might have a release branch, which helps us to prepare a release. And we probably also going to have some features and bug fix branches. You actually can see they are pretty, or this this model has kind of quite a few branches, and you as more complex your project is or will develop over time, you really have to know what you are doing with this branching model. You have to somehow have control. What happens when do we have to merge that commit in the other branch because it's needed there, and so on. You actually can see that it can get quite complex sometimes. So the Git flow branching model can be useful, when you have a defined number of releases per year. So when you're working in a waterfall-ish or project, where you have 3-4 releases per year, and then that's it. If you work in large teams with many developers together, then it might be useful, and when you have multiple versions in production where you have to maintain them, and then you have per version production, you have maybe a branch and so on. So Yeah, that's the context where it might be useful still these days. It might be less useful, the Git flow model, when you have small teams, which need to iterate quickly, these days. When you have in a highly in a quick in a quick iteration circle, you have to move fast, then it might be less useful because you have a lot of branches, you have to take care of them, you have to work with a lot of merges and so on. Might be less useful. Also, when you have a single version in production, might be not the best thing. And of course, yeah, as I mentioned, continuous deployment delivery might be not that model for you. But it's still valid. It's nothing wrong when the context and you agreed in your team to work like that, then it's absolutely fine. Of course, I have absolutely nothing against Gitflow. It's just you have to think which model or which strategy is the best for us. If that fits your project, then perfectly fine. Then, of course, with the rise of GitHub, which we all know, and by the way, GitHub is not Git. GitHub is just a hosting service with tons of plugins or features, of course, but it's just a Git hosting service. So underneath GitHub is just Git as a version control system. Just to add that as a side note. Yeah, of course, GitHub came up with its own flow back in 2011, was that exactly? Where they say, no, Git flow is way too complex for us, or way too heavy for our open source project thinking. So we just have one master branch here in blue. And then when someone wants to create a new feature, we just make a feature branch or a bug fix branch and then merge that back into the master branch, which goes onto the production environment. Exactly. So GitHub Flow can be useful when we do continuous deployment delivery, exactly, because we just have to deal with one master main branch, which goes to production. Of course, from the sense of open source project, as we all know it on GitHub Flow makes sense, of course, yeah. Then when you have a single version in production, yeah, then it also might be useful for you. And GitHub Flow is less useful when you have, of course, multiple branches in multiple versions in production, where you have to maintain multiple versions of your software in your customer's environment. Exactly. Well, then we have the last of us now, the last branching model. You might have heard of it already. It's called trunk-based development, exactly. But why is it why trunk? So trunk is the thickest part of a tree. And I actually heard this word trunk for the first time when I used Subversion long time ago. That's where I heard that wording or that naming the first time. So trunk means it's the thickest part of your tree, and you have one trunk. So you have one master, one main branch, and nothing else. You just work on the master, on the main branch, and you don't create any other branches. And this master branch goes always so directly to production. So you have also here, so you have to know what you're doing. You cannot say, well, I will just do a commit on master and then we will see. Or I do a commit on master, push that, and then we will do a review. No, that's not the sense. So, but when is actually, or when might be trunk-based development useful? So it might be useful or work best when you are heading or aiming for continuous deployment delivery, of course. The biggest advantage is when you are doing trunk-based development in pair and ensemble programming. That's the perfect environment for that, because you are working together, like 4 or 6 or how many eyes are looking on the code base at the same time. So you are developing, reviewing, testing, and so on, all one in one go. And that's the perfect environment from my perspective, from my perspective to actually to do trunk-based development. Um, when you're pairing, when you often pair in your team, exactly. Otherwise, when you of course have small teams, not that large, small, just small teams, a couple of developers which you can actually trust, because trunk-based development has also a lot to do with trusting each other, that the other person or the other human being is knows what she is doing. So that's important, that everyone is aware of high quality standards and so on, of testing, of course, of testing. Everyone is aware of testing and tests his own shit on his machine. So yeah, has finally a lot to do with trust when you're a couple of devs working together. And then, of course, works best when you're on a solo project, when you have a private project on your machine just locally, or and then push that to GitHub. Then, of course, you are probably, yeah, most of us will just work on one branch and don't create any supporting branches. Of course, it can cause problems when you want to work together on GitHub or contribute to an open source project, and it can cause problems because everyone in the world is at different times and is working at different times of the day on the same code base. So that might be not the best thing. Just, yeah, you better go with creating a branch and then creating a pull request and so on. Yeah, of course. And then junior developers, when you have a lot of junior developers in your team, yeah, just to starting, that might be overwhelming. Yeah, of course, when you directly go for trunk-based development, of course. And then when you have large teams, so when you have large teams, when you have to handle large teams, then it might also not be the best thing to start with. So here we are. That's basically it. These three strategies. Now I'm just wondering, um, who of you can just write me a message in the chat. I'm not sure if I can see that. Just write me a message in the chat. Which branching strategy or branching model are you using? One of these three here, or nothing, or your own created branching model? Would just be interesting to see which branching model you are using. Yeah, just leave me a comment in the chat. That would just be, yeah, very interesting to see. So what I want to say finally is actually, yeah, you don't have to use any of them, any of the three. You can adapt and improve for your own team and your context. You can come up with your own branching strategy if that's useful, of course. Yeah. So here are you absolutely free. So I have talked about a lot, or I mentioned a lot of master, and then I switched sometimes to main, but why master, and can we change its name, and so on. So the history behind that is not that far away. Um, um, First, or like I think it's until 2 years ago or 1.5 years ago, every time you initiated or initialized a new repository, the default branch was called master. That's where that name originated from, because the default behavior of Git was, when you create or initiate a new repository, the default branch is called master, but as we are in today's world, we have to be careful what language we use, and that is why master and slave and so on is not the appropriate wording anymore. So Git changed their behavior, and every Git repository or every new repository you create these days will call its default branch main branch and not master anymore. Yeah, exactly. Even when you create a repository on GitHub, you can also create a repository or initialize a repository on GitHub. Even there, the default branch is called main exactly, and not master. But of course, you still see a lot of repository where the main branch is called master. Exactly. But one can easily change that name, of course. They are just like two Git commands which you have to use, just rename the master branch to main and push that branch, and that's it basically. Yeah. So it doesn't take a lot of effort to change an existing master branch into a main branch. Good. What's coming next? Yeah, Git arose like 17 years ago, exactly, and is very, very popular these days. But what's coming next? Are we in 10 years? Are we still using Git, or are there any other version control systems? It might be that you already use another version control system. I just want to list a few of them. There are some other version control systems, of course. Mercurial source control management is one, then PyJule is one, then Fossil source control management is one, and Microsoft Team Foundation version control system. I haven't worked with the four of them, so I don't have any experiences how they actually work, if they are better or in some circumstances. I actually don't know. So, but feel free to check them out. That's always interesting. It's always interesting to learn new stuff and have a look at them. They might be useful in your context, in your specific context. So I think there is no, as I said at the beginning, there is no golden path which you have to go, also in version control system, like programming languages. But of course, Git is probably is very dominant these days, and it's cool. I like it. I like it actually. Yeah, good, perfect. Here we are. Um, if there is anything you should remember um, for the future from this talk, then there are three things. My name is Simon, and I'm a huge version control lover. Whichever version control systems will come into the future, or might be the next big thing. The second important thing which you have to remember, that branching it is nothing else than a chain of single commits with two pointers, actually, the branch pointer and the head pointer. Exactly. Yeah. And finally, change is the only constant, and you shouldn't be afraid of it, of course. Yeah. With that, I would like to thank you for attending this session. If you have any questions, even later, don't has to be yet. Even you have to maybe feedback later on, or you say, oh, that's something I want to know more about, you can always ping me or DM me on Twitter, whatever you would like. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Simon, for this session. It
Thank
was
you.
it was really a really nice overview of everything from coming from the beginning of Git to how to use it in the modern way. But we don't have a lot of questions in the chat right now, but we've got an interesting mention, and because we still have 5 minutes to go,
Yeah, sure.
we could discuss a bit about it, about the future of versioning and how it should work. Method is mentioning that it probably be AI controlled at some point. What do you think about that? Okay,
Yeah,
because
maybe,
we see
maybe.
with GitHub Copilot some things coming from the AI world coming right into the development and programmers world. So why not versioning after all?
Exactly. There might be really interesting field for that. I guess there is a huge potential also with some very interesting feature which GitHub was and is building on. I think there's a huge future for that. So I'm really really looking forward to what's coming next or whatever. So I believe really so that could help in whatever might be or whatever the improvement might be. Of course, yeah, that sounds very, very, very interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. That's definitely a topic where we should keep an eye on, just
Mm-hmm.
because, as you mentioned, there's a lot of different new tools dedicated to versioning that are coming, maybe with different features, maybe more adapt to some workflows or whatever. So yeah, it's still moving.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, we don't have any more questions, so thank you very much again for being with us. It was really
Thank
great
you.
to have you with for this session on this serverless track. And don't forget, people, that there is this packet partnerships to win some ebooks. So feel free to contribute and to engage with the rest of the community. Thanks again, Simon, for being with us, and enjoy the rest of the conference.
Thank you.
Have a nice end of the day. Bye bye.
Bye bye. Bye, folks. Bye.